No one remembered how many times Jake Miller had eaten lunch alone, but that day for the first time he sat facing the fence. A little girl stood across the street holding her stomach, face covered in dust, eyes fixed on the sandwich package in his hands. Jake hesitated for a second, then tore the sandwich in half, giving the larger portion to the girl, keeping only the smaller piece for himself. The girl accepted it with both hands trembling, as she said, "I thank you." Then she darted away as if afraid someone might take it back, right at that moment. The manager's voice boomed from behind Jake. "What the hell are you doing? Don't encourage those beggars. They'll bring the whole pack here." A few workers laughed along. Others just watched, saying nothing. Jake didn't argue, just lowered his head and continued eating his half of the dry, hard sandwich. The lunch break passed in silence. No one sat near Jake. He returned to his shift with dust on his hands, sweat staining the back of his shirt, and his eyes still lingering on the fence where the girl had stood. Jake wasn't new to silence. Growing up with a father who preferred fists to words had taught him when to speak and when to endure. His calloused hands and quiet demeanor made him invisible on most days. Just another body moving concrete and steel. But today felt different. The girl's eyes had sparked something he couldn't name. "Miller," the foreman barked later that afternoon, "you're behind schedule on Section B. What's the holdup?" Jake wiped his brow and pointed to a structural issue. The engineers had missed rather than praise his attention to detail. The foreman scoffed. "That's why we have inspectors. Just do your job." As the sun set over the construction site, workers filed out, joking and making weekend plans. No one invited Jake. No one noticed when he lingered, checking if the girl might return. She didn't. Walking back to his small rented room, Jake passed a corner store. He paused, counting the loose change in his pocket, then entered. When he emerged, he carried 2 wrapped sandwiches, one for tonight, one for tomorrow, just in case. Have you ever seen someone scolded for doing the right thing? Right, too kind if you believe a sandwich can change a life. Stay with us because what comes next will touch your heart even deeper. That evening, Jake had just returned to his lodging when he received a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for today. Someone wants to meet you." No address, no name. He thought it was a prank, but 20 minutes later the front desk phone rang repeatedly. "There's a red car parked at the entrance, causing an obstruction. Can you come down and check?" Jake stepped outside and froze. A gleaming red Mustang GT was blocking the construction site entrance. A woman around 50 stepped out wearing an old military shirt, hair pulled back tightly, her gaze sharp and assessing. Beside her was the same girl from this morning, now in clean clothes, standing close, yet still looking at Jake with that unchanged expression. The woman extended her hand. "I'm retired Colonel Sandra Lee. This is my granddaughter. She's been undergoing psychological treatment since losing her mother. She doesn't eat anything strangers give her, but today she ate your sandwich." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I just didn't want to see her hungry." Sandra nodded, handing him an envelope. "We don't repay kindness with money, but tomorrow I'll return and take you somewhere. Your compassion would be valued." Jake hesitated before taking the envelope. Inside wasn't money, but a photograph. The little girl, younger, smiling beside a woman in military uniform. "That's my daughter," Sandra explained, noticing his confusion. "Mira hasn't spoken more than a few words since the funeral. 3 months ago, until today, when she came home and told me about the man who shared his lunch." Jake looked at the photo, then at Mira, who now stood partially hidden behind her grandmother. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. Sandra's expression remained stoic, but her voice softened slightly. "Loss is part of service. What's harder is watching what it does to those left behind around them." Other workers began gathering, curious about the expensive car and the commotion. The manager pushed through, his face reddening when he spotted Jake Miller. "What's going on here?" Sandra turned, assessing the manager coldly. "You must be the one who shouted at my granddaughter today." "I didn't." The manager began, not directly. Sandra interrupted, "But loud enough for a traumatized child to hear that her hunger was an inconvenience to you." The manager's bluster deflated slightly. "Look, we can't have people hanging around the site. It's a liability issue." "Interesting," Sandra replied. "I'll remember that tomorrow when I return with the Veteran Outreach Program representatives." She turned back to Jake. 7 a.m. "Be ready." As they drove away, the Mustang's engine roaring deliberately loud, the manager rounded on Jake. "What did you do? Who are these people?" Jake shrugged, just someone who noticed something you didn't. That night Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Mira's eyes, about the photo of her mother, about the way Sandra had said veteran outreach program like it was both a promise and a weapon. He wondered what tomorrow would bring for the first time in years. He felt something stir inside him. Not quite hope, but its quieter cousin, curiosity. The next morning, while Jake was working, the Mustang reappeared, but this time, accompanied by 2 military jeeps. The entire worksite froze in confusion. The manager rushed out, "We don't have any business with the military. You people need to go elsewhere." Sandra didn't respond. She walked directly to Jake, inviting him into her vehicle. They drove him to a veteran reintegration center, a facility supporting wounded warriors and children who had lost parents in service. Sandra explained, "We need someone to supervise our labor rehabilitation model, teaching soft skills to veterans in recovery. Would you like to try?" Jake was perplexed. "I'm not educated. I don't know how to teach or talk to people." Mira stepped forward from behind, for the first time taking Jake's hand, saying, "But you know how to share half your sandwich without being afraid of losing your part." That sentence silenced the room. Sandra nodded. The Department of Defense immediately approved funding for Jake to receive basic training for 3 months. The clip of him sharing his sandwich, captured by security cameras, was shared internally. Within the military community, all comments flooded in. "We need more people like him, rather than those just putting on a show. He's not military, but his actions show the same decency as those who served." The construction site, where Jake worked, began receiving negative reactions for their previous treatment. The manager was forced to call Jake back. He refused. What Jake didn't know was that Sandra hadn't randomly discovered him. After Mira had mentioned a kind construction worker, Sandra had pulled security footage from buildings across the street. She'd watched Jake not just share his sandwich, but give the larger portion while keeping the smaller part for himself. Then she'd run a background check. What she found surprised her. Jake Miller, 34, son of a Vietnam veteran, who died by suicide when Jake was 15. No criminal record, no social media, just a man who'd been invisible his entire life, yet chose kindness. When he thought no one was watching, the Veterans Center director initially resisted hiring a civilian with no experience. These men and women have complex trauma. He'd argued they need professional guidance. Sandra had simply played the video again. "Show me a more qualified person." She challenged someone who understands sacrifice without needing to be thanked. The director had reluctantly agreed to a trial period. Jake's first day at the center was awkward. Veterans with missing limbs, burn scars, and 1,000-yard stares watched him suspiciously. "This is Jake," Sandra introduced. "He's here to help with the woodworking program." "What unit?" someone called out. "He's not military," Sandra replied, "but he speaks the same language." A tall man with a prosthetic leg scoffed. "What language is that?" Sandra nodded to Jake. He stepped forward, uncomfortable with the attention, and simply said, "The language of enough." To share that afternoon, Jake set up the workshop instead of giving instructions. He simply started working on a project, a simple wooden bench, when a young veteran hesitantly approached Jake, silently handed him a sanding block. No pressure, no questions, just space to be useful again. By the end of the week, 6 veterans were showing up regularly. By the end of the month, there was a waiting list. The construction company called 3 times, offering Jake his job back with higher pay. The 3rd time, Sandra answered his phone. "He's building something more important now." She told them, "He's building people back up." Have you ever witnessed a moment of kindness that broke your heart with its beauty type? Soul touched. 1 month later, Jake officially became the supervisor of the labor rehabilitation group. He didn't use many words, but each day he divided his lunch into 2 portions in case someone new arrived, so he would have something to share. Mira, the little girl, gradually grew healthier, learned to draw, and began talking more. One day Mira drew him a simple picture, a sandwich and a Mustang below it, in childish wobbly handwriting. "Thank you for being kind when no one looked." Jake was speechless. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, where he once kept his mother's birth certificate. No awards needed. Knowing that day he hadn't turned away, the Veterans Center transformed under Jake's quiet influence. While psychologists and therapists provided essential clinical support, Jake offered something else, a place where worth wasn't measured by words or credentials, but by the work of one's hands. One morning, a former Marine who hadn't spoken in years brought Jake a coffee. No words exchanged, just a nod of recognition between two men who understood that sometimes presence matters more than conversation. Sandra watched from her office as the woodworking program expanded into metalwork. Then, auto repair. The waiting list grew, the success stories multiplied. "What's your secret?" a government official asked during an inspection. Jake looked uncomfortable with the question. "No secret," he finally said. "They just need to know they still have something worth giving." The official made notes about innovative therapeutic approaches and nonverbal communication techniques, missing the simplicity of what Jake had created, a place where broken people could make broken things whole again, including themselves. 6 months after starting, Jake received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted to replicate his program nationally. There would be training, certifications, protocols. Sandra found him staring at the letter during lunch. "You don't have to decide today," she said. Jake nodded, then did what had become his habit, tore his sandwich in half, and offered her the bigger portion. Sandra smiled, understanding the gesture's meaning beyond words. "They want to turn this into something complicated," Jake finally said. "And you think it's simple?" Jake looked out at the workshop, where veterans were building a table together. Mira sitting nearby, drawing. "Not simple," he corrected. "Just human. Not everyone has much, but everyone can share half of the little they have." Jake wasn't eloquent, not good at conversation, but one right action, in a moment when nobody was paying attention, changed everything. A little girl regained her trust. A grandmother found hope again, and a seemingly nameless man, now known as the one who saved with a sandwich. If you ever believe kindness doesn't need to be seen, this is why you should continue doing what's right. If you believe a small action can touch someone's heart, subscribe to this channel. Here we tell stories that society has missed. QH. Incredible stories, because some heroes never stop serving. Don't teach those beggars bad habits. The boss yelled when he noticed the worker giving half of his sandwich to the skinny girl. Waiting outside the fence, the guy just remained quiet, lowered his head, and continued work. That evening, the whole construction yard was thrown into pandemonium when a shiny red Mustang halted the main gate. Who brought it there, and why?